you spoke, Pranoy, at the 2022 National Test Prep Association National Conference, and you gave a highly acclaimed presentation on COVID learning loss that I have been full of regret for not being able to attend.
I did attend that presentation and it was awesome.
And so Amy's been rubbing it in for so long. So I'm really grateful that you're going to come and share what you discussed with me and our listeners. Let's start from the top.
Sure.
You know, on a scale of 1 to 100, how bad exactly has COVID learning loss been?
Yeah, so this is something that, as I mentioned, once testing availability picked back up, you start seeing a lot of students taking the October 2021 test, and testing is back in place. Kids are back in school for the most part since fall of this year, and we quickly came to realize that, oh boy, these baselines, the PSAT scores were coming in much, much lower than we were used to. And our bread and butter, we typically have students coming in about 1,100, 1,200 is where our old baselines used to be. And we are seeing, honestly, I feel like the majority of students are coming in with sub-thousands these days on the SAT scale. And a lot of them really just struggle with fundamentals. So we recognized this early on, and we kicked the can down the road, honestly, for a lot of students. We get those PSAT scores down, and we insisted we are not going to start with you until the summer. We need you to finish out your school year and absorb everything you can from school, because from this baseline, getting anywhere close to where you want to be is just not going to happen, especially while you juggle the school year. Time management skills, I think, really took a beating as well.
It's interesting you mentioning test scores. Obviously, we are all test prep professionals here. And so it's interesting that what you're observing, right, is that apparently the impact on test scores, the fact that the test scores are providing some insight or indication for college readiness, which is absolutely what they're supposed to do, right?
Exactly.
And that's what we would kind of expect. If we know that COVID learning loss exists, then we would start to see that impact in test scores. I think we're all kind of observing that. Now, you've done your homework, Pranoy, for sure. Yeah. And you've looked at a lot of the research. Can you tell us a bit more about kind of where you found some of this research and what have you uncovered from this research about COVID learning loss?
Sure. Yeah. So everywhere. God, we're excited for days. A lot of great information came from ACT's research team, for which I'm really thankful for. NWEA assessments, which I thought were really helpful to look at because those are virtual assessments. So students were still able to take that at the same clip. Because our paper-based ACT and SATs, the data can be a little fuzzy, a little self-selection based on regions where tests were held, or students who went out of their way to make sure they could take it. But the NWEA basically just kept on going as usual because it was always a virtual test. And our own baselines, we found drops close to 70 points baselines in reading and about 60 in math. I think the reading and writing was rough. And as far as the data goes, what I thought was most interesting is English actually suffered the most compared to any other subject. It goes English, math, reading, and then to a lesser degree, science. And I suppose that's because English and grammar is really more instructional based. Students learn how to write, how to use their prepositions, their verbs, and their pronouns and whatnot. So English actually suffered the most loss. So ACTs, go ahead.
I have to say, I find that really surprising.
Right?
I do too.
Because everybody talks about the math learning.
Anecdotally, really that's what we see.
Big. Yeah. I'm working with a student today who just, the parents concerned, she lost a lot during algebra 1, and I'm not sure she's ready for algebra 2 because of that. And we've heard that time and time again. But what you're saying is that on the verbal side that nobody pays attention to, and at least in my area, teachers don't even teach grammar in high school.
Yeah.
But we're saying, and you're talking about high school students seeing a big drop in reading and grammar.
Yeah, according to the ACTs, the English is almost twice as bad as the math.
Well, what's funny about that, let's think about that, guys. To your point, Mike, if students are getting the majority or all of their grammar instruction in 5th, 6th, maybe 7th grade, then what we might be seeing is because that was compromised. They didn't acquire that. In which case now we're observing that
that'll hit us a few years from now.
Yeah, we're going to see some downstream effects for sure that I'm honestly terrified of, because the data does show that younger students were more adversely impacted as well.
Right.
So we're working with fresh high schoolers. We haven't even seen the worst of it yet.
Yeah. Well, as I tell people, my youngest was in kindergarten for the first year of COVID. So I tell people, how long will COVID have impacted education? Well, let me just tell you, I'll be saying this when the class of 33 walks across the stage, my little Annie, then I will be able to say maybe COVID's over in terms of its impact on learning, right?
Yeah, you want a good stat. So the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development projected the economic impact of COVID learning loss at 14 trillion with a T dollars lost over the next 9 to 10 years.
Wow. So they definitely think this is a real, we talk about COVID learning loss and people imagine there might be a subjective element to this. We think the students lost learning, but really they learned on their own. But when the economists start factoring learning loss into their projections with that many zeros, that there's something concrete
for sure
supporting it.
Yeah. And I think we've come to the point where parents are starting to acknowledge it. We're getting the sheepish, how it went. And, they won't flat out say nobody learned a damn thing, through virtual school. And I mean, the students, fess up to it as well. I can't say I necessarily blame them particularly, during this formative years. You're going through just a really traumatic, unprecedented pandemic. As a teen, oh my God, in fact, even when I was in college, I skipped a lot of my classes. And that's just because of my learning style. It's not that I didn't learn. I would just go home and read the entire textbook instead, because I prefer learning at my own pace. And I had the maturity to do that. I don't necessarily know if high school students who it's hard enough to drag them to school, who cares about Pythagorean theorem? You get the, when am I ever going to use this in life? And suddenly they are not, held as accountable. There are easy outs there.
We hope you enjoyed this video as much as we did. You'll find plenty more like it when you explore the Tests and the Rest channel. Be sure to comment, share, and subscribe for a constant stream of insights into learning, education, testing, and admissions. For full podcasts and amazing resources, find us at testsandtherest.com.